Chapter 27. "This'd be better bloody good, Cassie," Wen growled. "I had him on the ropes then." "Sorry, boss, but he's not the murderer. It's a guy called Damien Anderson. He was in all the same classes as Martin Grimes, and Martin had a thing for him. He's a weird one, to say the least." "Someone being weird isn't a criminal offence, Cassie. If it were, half the country would be locked up." "No, it's his writing. This creative writing teacher told me he had a real talent and directed him to his agent. She wanted nothing to do with his stuff, and then he started harassing her. Wouldn't take no for an answer. I've just spoken to her and she said his work was much too dark for her. I asked him what way, and she described a murder scene he'd written. A woman tied to a climbing frame as if she'd been crucified, disemboweled and—" Her eyes gouged out. "Yes, he's our avenging angel. I'm sure of it." "Not just a fan," Wen said. This was more to herself than Cassie. "No, it feels personal, as if he needed to prove something." She paused. "So why didn't this woman make the connection when she read about the case in the newspaper?" "She's been in Mexico for the last 3 weeks. She only got back 2 days ago, so she had no idea about these murders." Cassie was tapping her right foot as she spoke. "But there's no clue to what happens next?" "No, he sent the first 3 chapters and she didn't want to see any more after that. The Benson unit sent his file through. Paranoid schizophrenia with delusional episodes and prone to violent outbursts. In fact, he attacked a fellow patient while he was in the unit with Martin. Someone got frisky with one of the female teachers. Damien took exception to that and let his fists do the talking." "Now, you see, that doesn't make sense. Why would a sadistic psychopath help a vulnerable woman?" It was at times such as these, even though they were, thank God, few and far between, that Jeff's input would have been invaluable. "No idea," Cassie shrugged. "Maybe that's where being mad comes in." Wen considered. "Get a small team to go to the last known address and bring this guy in. I'll take young Colin with me to visit Martin Grimes in hospital. I just hope he can give us some useful information, because we're running out of time." It was dark and cold. Becky didn't know where she was or how she got there. As she tried to move, she realised that she was tied hand and foot and had tape over her mouth. She tried to sit up, but there wasn't room. She couldn't even straighten her legs. She felt sick, but she knew she mustn't vomit. If she did, she might choke. She swallowed hard and tried to breathe deeply through her nose. Whatever drug she'd been given started to take effect again, and she felt thankful relief of drifting off to sleep. Maybe this was just a nightmare, and next time she woke up, it would be over. Or maybe she wouldn't wake up at all, and it would still be over. Wen hurried towards the mental health unit at Warrington General, Colin Briggs trying to keep up. As they reached the locked door to the unit, Wen pressed the bell far too hard and for far too long, as was shown by the cross face of the nurse on the other side of the glass. She pointed to her watch and mouthed, "You can't come in." Wen took out her warrant card and held it up to the glass. "Yes, I can," the DI said, leaving no doubt of her intention. The nurse looked confused, then punched in a code and opened the door, just enough to stick her head out. "What do you want at this time of night that can't wait until tomorrow?" she snapped. Wen looked at her own watch. "It is tomorrow, so please let us in. This won't keep." The staff member reluctantly stood to one side and let them pass. "Who's in charge here?" Wen asked. "Charge Nurse Kendrick. Shall I get him?" "What a good idea!" Wen wasn't usually this sarcastic. She normally left that to Cassie. But her patience was wearing thin, and her fear didn't help. The nurse disappeared and didn't return. Instead, a large guy in blue scrubs appeared, his hands in his pockets as he ambled towards them. When he got within spitting distance, he stopped, smiled, and held out his hand. "Phil McKendrick, can I just check your ID again, please? And while I do that, you can both sign in." He took the warrant cards and carefully inspected them. Then, once the officers had signed the book, he gave them back with a crooked smile on his face. "So, what can I do for you? Must be important to bring a detective inspector out this late." "It is, sir. I believe you've recently admitted a Mr. Martin Grimes from the Benson unit?" "Yes, we've not long got him settled. Why?" "We need to talk to him, please." "Sorry, that's not going to happen. Martin is heavily sedated and he won't be talking to anyone for a while." Oh, shit. This was a quiet curse. Wen closed her eyes, hoping that might help her focus. "Can I at least see him?" It wasn't that she didn't believe the man, but she wanted to see how true his statement was for herself. The charge nurse shrugged. "Okay, follow me." He led them down the corridor, and in a room next to the nurse's office was Martin Grimes. He had soft restraints on his wrists, and an oxygen mask covered his bruised face. "When will we be able to speak to him?" "In about 8 hours is my best guess," the nurse said as he leaned against the wall. Wen didn't take her eyes from the man in the bed, hoping that by staring at him, she would somehow get him to open his eyes and answer all the questions whizzing around in her head. What happened? "The best person to tell you that's downstairs in A&E, getting stitched back together." Wen looked at McKendrick, her face puzzled. The nurse he attacked with a scalpel. Cassie arrived at her destination. No lights, no movement, no sound. She hammered at the door and waited, probably not for as long as she should, before giving one of the officers the nod to batter down the door with the big red key. Once the lights were on, the small team went in separate directions. Nothing. Just a dull little terraced house. Nothing out of the ordinary. Neat, tidy, basic. "Boss, up here!" one of the men shouted from upstairs. Cassie took the stairs 2 at a time and found the officer standing in the doorway. As Cassie went into the room, she stopped in her tracks. Photos of the dead woman were everywhere. Some pictures had been taken while she was alive and showed her looking at something which obviously terrified her. But what? "Mom?" Another officer appeared at the bedroom door. "Mom?" "Yes," Cassie answered, still gazing at the photos. "What is it?" "You're needed in the kitchen." Cassie went back down, still trying to take in what she had seen upstairs. "What is it?" The officer didn't say anything, but nodded towards the fridge. Cassie opened it and peered in. "Right, get Socko here now, and let's wake up Mr. Anderson's neighbours, shall we?" Cassie backed out of the small kitchen and into the hallway, where she got out her phone and called her DI. "Mom, he's our man." He's not here, but Katrina Belinsky's eyes are. Wen received the news with mixed feelings. They knew who their killer was, but where he was more important now. In A&E, Wen and Colin were directed to the cubicle where the nurse assaulted by Martin Grimes was being treated. They peeped behind the curtain, where a pretty woman in uniform was putting the final suture into the last wound. "I'll come back and clean up later," she said, as she applied a sterile dressing to the man's forearm. She peeled off her gloves, put them into a yellow bag hanging at the side of the trolley, and pushed it out of the way. "Thanks," said Colin as she squeezed past him. "How are you, Mr. said Wen as she held out her hand. "Bunter, Mike Bunter. I'd shake hands, only everything hurts at the moment." He smiled as he sat up on the bed, then winced. He was a mess, with dressings on his face, arms and hands. When they had spoken to a doctor, he had said Mr. Bunter had multiple minor lacerations, with 5 needing suturing. "Can you tell us what happened, please?" said Colin. "Martin turned up at the unit about 10 and stood outside crying. We went to fetch him, and he came into the unit in some sort of trance. I took him into one of the side wards to try and get some sense out of him. That's when he flipped and pulled out the knife." "The scalpel?" "Yes. He started slashing at me, shouting that he hadn't killed them, but he couldn't stop them screaming at him. Then he took some cord from his pocket and climbed on a chair, and the next thing I knew, he was dangling." "And while this was going on, what were your colleagues doing?" "They came straight away, but I'd collapsed against the door, so they had trouble getting in. It all happened so fast." Mike Bunter shivered. He had turned pale. "I think you'd better lie down again," Wen said. "Colin, go and get someone." Colin slipped out of the cubicle, and Wen thanked Mike Bunter for his help. He opened his eyes and looked at Wen. He shouted something just before he kicked the chair away. "What did he say?" "This is for the avenging angel."